Ontario's jails have been over capacity for years, and the provincial government wants to build its way out of the crisis. Researchers recently got access to internal documents that detail the cost and scope of the plan. From Ottawa, Mackenzie Plumb is a PhD candidate in the criminology department at the University of Ottawa. And in Toronto, Lee Chapelle is the president of Canadian Prison Consulting. I want to thank both of you for joining us on the line. Mackenzie, I want to start with you. It was your research that brought the province's prison expansion to light. Help us understand what prompted you to investigate Ontario's prison system in the first place.
Yeah, so the Ford government's plan to massively expand Ontario's provincial jail system by more than 50% by 2050 was outlined in Solicitor General Michael Kerzner's March 2025 transition binder. So this was not previously disclosed to the public. I obtained it just last month through a Freedom of Information request as part of my PhD research that examines prison construction trends in Ontario prior to and since Confederation.
What did you find?
Well, according to the transition binder, the ministry's three-phase plan aims to increase Ontario's provincial jail capacity by up to 5,670 beds by 2050. So for context, the current jail bed count is around 10,000. Under the first phase, the Ford government has already announced prison building and expansion plans that will add well over 1,000 beds, while costing Ontario taxpayers $3 billion for construction alone. The second phase of jail expansion includes 1,500 more spaces for imprisoned people to be built from 2033 to 2041, while the third phase includes 2,000 to 3,000 more jail beds by 2050.
All right, I want to read a statement. We reached out to the Ministry of Solicitor General for comment, and they sent us back this statement. It reads, "Our government is making historic investments of $3 billion to modernize correctional infrastructure and expand capacity to keep criminals behind bars. Across the province, we are adding nearly 1,400 new beds in correction facilities and hiring 3,300 new staff to ensure dangerous criminals are never released due to a lack of space in adult correctional institutions. These investments address long-standing gaps in corrections facilities created by 10 years under the Liberals who closed institutions and decimated capacity. We continue to explore new ways to bring more capacity to our corrections facilities faster, and will be unveiling additional expansions in the coming months." Mackenzie, actually, I'm going to come back to you first. Do you have any response to that?
Of course. I think the investment is historic. It's unprecedented. It's going to be very expensive. And just to comment briefly on the comment of the Liberals opened more beds than they closed, and during the same time that this statement is discussing, as well as the Ford government themselves have closed beds during their time, including the intermittent centers at London and Toronto, which they then had to reopen.
Lee, you are no stranger to TVO's current affairs programming. You have been on the agenda numerous times to discuss corrections, but you have a particular insight that most people don't. You have been on the inside, and you continue to work with people who are going in for the first time. So help us understand a little bit about how bad of a problem overcrowding is right now in our prison system.
It's severe, Jan, and if I may, I'd like to walk back to that topic just for a moment. The statement that was put out by Soldier in regards to the Liberals, this is not a partisan problem, although certainly through the rhetoric, the Conservatives have a different stance. But if you want to walk this back to where we became in trouble with overcrowding and a lot of issues was under the Harris government, with the Rob Sampson was at that time the minister, and in 2000 we went super jail model, which was American style, and the Toronto South, the Central East Correctional Center, the Central North Correctional Center. Central North was privatized for 5 years. It didn't work. But At the same time, forensic health beds were shut down. Medium security institutions were closed, and such as Guelph, Birch Rapids was a minimum that they were running at that point. So that is erroneous. The statement it certainly isn't factual. The facts are we have about 8,500 bed space for in Ontario presently. We're running at a couple thousand above that. That leads to triple bunking for the bulk of the offenders. So you're talking about a very small cell, double bunk, and somebody on the floor sleeping with their head beside the toilet. This has also caused a great deal of strain in the environment, on the ranges, on the open shared areas, phone times, in combination to the overcrowding, which does cause more. I tend to call them domestic issues among inmates, but it's certainly a driver of violence and of conflict.
So you mention the overcrowding, 3 to a bunk. You talk about sort of not having, essentially, when we talk about domestic issues, resources within the jail system. One would look at that and say, well, perhaps we need more prisons. Is that the answer, Mackenzie?
I would say undoubtedly there is a crowding issue. I would never deny that. However, I would say that building new jails and expanding existing ones years down the line will not address crowding in the system today, as even the newest facilities that were built to address crowding in the recent past, like the Southwest Detention Center in Windsor and the Toronto South Detention Center, were over capacity shortly after they opened in 2014. The 300 plus bed Thunder Bay Correctional Complex was announced in 2017, and 9 years later, it's still not open. And the Ford government continues to think that building and filling these new and bigger jails years from now is going to address crowding today. I think if the government really wants to alleviate crowding in Ontario's provincial jails, they need to fix the broken bail system that results in many people being sent to pretrial detention. According to Statistics Canada, more than 80% of people held in Ontario's provincial jails are awaiting their day in court. For context, in 1985-86, roughly a quarter of people held in Ontario's provincial jails were in pretrial detention. 2001 to 2002, they accounted for more than half, and have ever since in Ontario. So amid Ford's jail not bail frenzy, those denied bail and on pretrial are accounting for 85.9% of people in our jails right now. So we have a bail crisis, but I don't think it can reasonably framed as one that's too lenient.
So Lee, I want to come back to whether prisons and beds are actually the solution here. Do we need more prisons or do we need more beds? Does that make this situation a little bit better?
To address overcrowding. So as it stands, looking at that plan and the finite amount or however much they've denoted to that, I would be supportive of potentially one new jail, which is far better equipped resource-wise, that would alleviate the strain. We've had growing population numbers in Ontario, so I mean I could see that, but half of the money that they're proposing and only one institution that would be well thought out, that could be constructive, purposeful, rehabilitation in mind, mental health, because our forensic mental health beds are non-existent. If it were to take into consideration all of those things and alleviate the strain, great. And then the balance of the money needs to be put into the community. Provincial corrections doesn't have halfway houses. So many individuals end up getting out from a provincial jail with nowhere to go and no structure. And so it's not hard to see what they're creating is people coming in and out, getting out, coming back, getting out, coming back.
One thing I don't want to ignore is on the rundown, we have talked a lot about public safety being a top concern for Ontarians and Canadians. And I am curious, Mackenzie, do more prisons keep us safe?
I think everyone wants to live in communities that feel safer. I just know that the evidence tells us that this is best achieved through investments in infrastructure and supports upstream from jail to prevent criminalized harms to the extent that is possible. There are many ways we could enhance community well-being and safety with the funds the government wants to blow on building and filling new and bigger provincial jails in towns and cities across Ontario. Just for an example, if the province adds another 5,670 jail beds over the next however long as they plan to do, the bill for construction alone will be at least $6.8 billion, and the cost to operate them is over $2 million per day. With this $6.8 billion, it'll cost to build these new jail spaces, the province could instead build close to 25,000 permanent and supportive housing spaces at $275,000 per unit for people seeking homes, drugs, treatment, recovery support, and mental health care. Similarly, the annual cost to operate these beds could cover the costs of running over 15,000 permanent and supportive housing spaces. So these are, unlike imprisonment, proven to reduce law breaking and transform lives while significantly cutting costs associated with paramedic calls, emergency room visits, and hospitalizations, as well as policing, court hearings, and imprisonment. Obviously, this is this one alternative is not a catch-all solution, but at a time when many people living in the province are concerned about the impacts of crowded jails, as well as the flow of unhoused people from the streets and encampments to and from prisons, the unmet mental health needs that are contributing to criminalization and incarceration, and unmet physical health needs that resulting in public drug use, arrests, and jailing. Permanent and supportive housing offers a way out of the cycle of building and filling new jail spaces only to build and fill more, all while turning lives around and making us safer. I just think there is a better way than jail, not bail, and it's one that's grounded in evidence and a shared obligation to care for people who have been made vulnerable by the excesses of capitalism and the vast inequalities it creates.
Lee, I'll get you to respond there. Mackenzie listed a number of ways that we can move this money into a different direction to help make people feel safe. But what could the government spend money on instead of building more prisons?
Yeah, well, return on investment with the plan that they presently have is not appealing, I don't think, and shouldn't be to any Canadian who's footing the bill for these plans. I work with a lot of first-time offenders, and they tend to be on bail for years prior to sentencing. There are, and I'll concede the point that there's post-pandemic, there's been increased mental health issues. In Toronto, there's been more blatant crime than I've seen, and it's not just picking an incident or two and blowing that out of proportion. My barber shared how at Sherway Gardens 2 weeks ago, he was caught himself in the midst of three masked attackers with guns stealing a vehicle from a couple women. There are people, TTC, there is concern. There is a fear in Toronto. But again, if we can put resources towards the community, there are instances where we do need to lock people up there for whatever reasons, whatever brought them to that point, but they're dangerous, they're violent. And ideally, when they go inside, they'll be able to have the resources to work towards getting better. 95% of everybody who is incarcerated in Canada today will eventually be released at one point or another. So again, on a return on investment perspective, more community resources are required, most definitely.
I want to switch gears a little bit. Another story that's grabbing the headlines has been about inmates getting out of jail before their sentence has been served. Global News reported that 157 inmates had been accidentally released from provincial custody between 2021 and 2025. Lee, help me understand this. How does something like this happen?
Well, there's a number of factors, and I'll tell you, when I began doing time in 1986 through 2020, that was the sort of thing that you'd go to sleep with dreams about, that you'd be mistakenly released the next day. It would happen really, really sporadically, like occasionally. I think this is a result of staff burnout. The lack of attention to detail, the institutions that have 1,200 people in them, there are, so what I noted in my last stay, which was in the Central East Correctional Center, and it was a considerable difference from the 80s, 90s, was that there was the oversight within the prison had been almost removed. When it came to cells, you're designated for a cell. You're supposed to be in that cell. Walks are done when we're locked up, all that stuff. But during my stint, my very last one, people were choosing to sleep where they wanted. Nobody was calling them on it. So I think it's a culmination of a number of things: not dotting their I's, not crossing their T's, and burnout, and I think also probably on an odd occasion, I wouldn't take away the possibility of a payoff. Certainly some correctional officers have been arrested for things along those lines, and there are some who I think would be open to that.
Mackenzie, I want to circle back to your Freedom of Information request. The province recently changed the rules around how people and researchers and journalists will be getting information through FOI requests. How do you continue to pursue the work that you do? And will that stop you from doing what you do?
Yes, so under these new Freedom of Information rules, the government just introduced, so it's minister records, such as the transition binder that I received that included the province's secret jail expansion plans, will unlikely be able to be obtained by journalists, researchers, and other members of the public moving forward. When the Ford government blocks access to records concerning the inner workings associated with their jail expansion efforts, it makes me ask myself, who are they protecting? I would argue these rules are not protecting Ontarians. I think if any government of any political stripe wants to undertake new initiatives of any kind, that the details should be publicly disclosed so that they can be scrutinized for the merits and consequences by the people the politicians are claiming to represent. Anything less is undemocratic. The public has a right to know what the provincial government is up to with their tax dollars. That's even aside from the research aspect. The new rules have already impacted some of my research. Looking into specifically correspondence related to a jail in Kemptville that is being planned. So we already know how the Ford government tends to operate. Just take the Greenbelt scandal as an example. It's hard to see how this move contributes to a supposed plan to protect Ontario, in my opinion.
Mackenzie, Lee, we are going to have to leave it there. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me.